some background study on the scribes and the Pharisees. September 10th, Jesus silences critics, background study on the Sabbath day. Today, Jesus glorifies God. We're going to, next two lessons, John. So today, a little bit of background on the uniqueness of the Gospel of John. And that'll be throughout the lesson. Okay. Beautiful slide, isn't it? How many of you wish you were there with the tent? To God be the glory, great things he has done. That looks sort of like Yosemite.
Is there not a motel down below there?
I don't know. But beautiful, I imagine one of our national parks. Okay, lesson context. I said John. As you know, there are 4 Gospels in the New Testament, and they tell the story of Jesus. The word gospel comes from the Greek euangelion, which means the good news. And that Greek word is found 76 times in the New Testament. Interestingly, it's mentioned the most, tied for 9 times, in Romans and Philippians. Paul talks about the good news. Now, the first 3, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are very similar. We know Matthew, also known as Levi, was an apostle, a tax collector, and John, 4th, was an apostle also. Mark was the cousin of Barnabas, and he accompanied Paul and Barnabas on the first missionary journey, but he went back. Later, he becomes closely associated with Peter, and it's believed that that's where he got a lot of his information. In fact, in 1 Peter 5:13, we see the closeness of Mark to Peter, where Peter calls him my son Mark. That's in 1 Peter 5:13. And of course, Luke, the beloved physician, was close to Paul, accompanied on the missionary trips, and he was with Paul pretty much to the end. Paul says in 2 Timothy 4:11, 2 Timothy is believed to be the last epistle that Paul wrote, and he says, only Luke is with me. So Luke remained with Paul until the end. Synoptic, these first 3 are called synoptic gospels from the Latin, seen together or same view. You got the word optic there, which refers to seeing or view. Tell many of the same stories and sometimes in the same order. John is believed to be written a bit later than the other ones, about time from 80 to 95. And since John was written later, he knew what were in the other ones, so he says, I don't want to repeat what the people already know. So he has about 90% of his material is not found in the other 3 Gospels. And we'll see what some of that is later in the lesson today. His teaching focuses on Jesus' identity and his unique relationship to his Father. In fact, John, apostle, has more mentions of the Father and my Father than the other 3 Gospels combined. And then there's no parables in John, and there's no casting out of demons. And almost half of the Gospel of John goes from the triumphal entry till the resurrection. So 10 of 21 chapters are on the final week. And John provides background information, well, a lot of them do, where they call Jesus, they say rabbi, that means teacher, or we have found the Messiah, i.e., that's the Christ. So a lot of that, but that's found in some of the other ones also. So here's some of the differences. Matthew begins with Jesus' genealogy and the nativity. Mark, ministry of John the Baptist. This is how they start. Luke, John the Baptist's birth and nativity. And then John talks from the beginning. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And it talks a lot about the human history there. Notice both Matthew and Luke talk about the nativity. But they are extremely at different ends. About 99% of Matthew's account on the nativity is only in Matthew. About 99% of Luke's is only in Luke. And are you familiar with gospel harmonies? A.T. Robertson's Harmony of the Gospels. Only one verse they have in common. That's at the end. Joseph withdraws to the district of Galilee. He went and lived there in a town called Nazareth, so was fulfilled what was said through the prophets that he would be called a Nazarene. And then Luke 2:39, when Joseph and Mary had done everything according to the law, they returned to Galilee in their own town of Nazareth. That's a little bit different. Luke has Nazareth, Bethlehem, Nazareth. Matthew has, they were living in Bethlehem all along. Then they go to Egypt to escape Herod. And then they find out Herod's dead. And then Joseph had every intention of going back to Bethlehem. But then when he found out that Herod's son was there, he didn't want to go back, so he was told in a dream, well, go to Galilee and live in Nazareth, and that fulfilled the scripture there. So I'll let you just look at that for a moment. Content exclusive to John. Got the first miracle. Woman at the well. And then we got a whole section here, 5.5 chapters straight that's only in John. The ones there in purple are mentioned several times throughout. The woman caught in adultery, that's next week's lesson. Good shepherd, sheep, and of course, the raising of Lazarus. Jesus wept, John 11:35. So, John 6, major turning point in Jesus' ministry. Sometime after this, now John uses a lot of that, that's a transitional, or after this. Sometime after this, after teaching, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee. That is the Sea of Tiberias. There's one of those parentheticals. A great crowd of people were following him because they saw the signs he had performed by healing the sick. And also he fed you. So they followed him. And then right after that, we'll have the feeding of the 5,000. Then Jesus talks about the bread of life. I am the bread of life. Jesus said to them, verily, truly, or truly, truly, I say unto you, I tell you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in him. Ugh, drink his blood? They had a hard time at that. Many of his disciples said, this is a hard teaching. It is a hard teaching if you're a Jew. Drinking his blood, eating his flesh. We're not cannibals. Who can accept it? From this time, many of his disciples turned back and no longer followed him. Jesus, now probably this is a low point in his ministry. He asked his own apostles, are you going to leave me also? Peter speaks up, says, Lord, to whom can we go? You have the words of life. But eat my flesh and drink my blood. Can a good Jew do that? Look at that. Anyone who eats blood must be cut off from their people. That's in the Torah. That's the law. You can't do that. They didn't realize he was speaking figuratively. Today's lesson takes place at the Feast of Booths. Now, a few quarters ago, we were talking about the 3 different festivals, and this was the last great festival of the calendar year. You shall dwell in booths for 7 days. All native Israelites shall dwell in booths, that your generations may know that I made the people of Israel dwell in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. And there was a command that all Israelites were to return to Jerusalem for these feasts, the Passover, or the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of Weeks, which we know as Pentecost, and then finally the Feast of Ingathering, or the Feast of Booths, which was the end of their agricultural year, essentially. But Jesus went to this Feast of Booths, and let's look at some of Jesus' brothers' misunderstanding. How many brothers did he have? It's between 3 and 5. Four. How many sisters? 2 or more, right? It says sisters, so. Okay, so getting ready to go. This is the context of our lesson. When the Jewish festival of tabernacles was near, Jesus' brother said to him, "Leave Galilee and go to Judea so that your disciples may see the works you do. No one who wants to become a public figure acts in secret." And of course, becoming a public figure was Jesus' prime goal, wasn't it? He had a publicity agent, look what he did. He healed that. No, he would say, keep it quiet. Don't tell. He was on the low down here. He didn't want to glorify himself. He wanted to glorify the Lord. Now, his brothers say, "Since you are doing these things, show yourself to the world," for even his own brothers did not believe in him. 2 brothers are responsible for 2 of the epistles in the Bible. James did not believe in him. What happens in Acts 15, the council in Jerusalem? Who's in charge? James. Jude wrote that epistle. Sometimes hard to understand epistle. So maybe after his resurrection, they turned around. I did Words of Christ in blue because red did not look good on this background. I learned never do red font on blue background. It drives you crazy, especially people in back. Therefore, Jesus told them, the crowd, told his brothers, "My time is not yet here. For you, any time will do. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify that its works are evil." Well, who's going to like you if you tell them that what they do is evil? That's not a good way to influence people and win friends. You go ahead to the festival. I'm not going up to this festival because my time has not yet, fully come. Before this, my time has not yet come, my time has not yet come, my time has not yet come, my time has not yet fully come. So we're getting close.
So do we take it from there that Jesus is fully aware that he's getting close to his arrest and trial and then crucifixion and death?
Yep. This will be like coming up his final Passover with the apostles. So after this, he stayed in Galilee, even though according to the law, he was supposed to attend this. However, after his brothers had left for the festival, he went also, not publicly, but in secret. In secret.
Incognito.
In secret. We're going to see more of that throughout this lesson, doing things in secret. Now, at the festival, the Jewish leaders were watching for Jesus and asking him, "Where is he? We want to hear him preaching. He's such a good preacher." Is that it? No, they were looking for ways to accuse him. They'd actually decided, well, we're not doing well on, discredit him, so we got to terminate his life. Among the crowds, there was widespread whispering. Why whispering? There's a crowd, you can shout it, whispering among the crowds. Some say he's a good man. Some whispered, he's a good man. No, he deceives the people, others whispered, but no one would say anything publicly about him for, why? Fear of the leaders. What did they have to fear? What did they have to fear? John tells us, John's the only one who tells us what they had to fear. Only mentioned in John. We'll have 4 passages here on why the people were feared to express their belief that Jesus was indeed the Christ or indeed the Messiah. So first one is in John 9. This is after Jesus had healed the man that was born blind. And the Pharisees and the scribes were questioning the man and questioning his parents. Was he blind for birth? Was he really? And they do all these questions, and his parents don't want to answer. They say, He's of age. Let him answer. Let him get kicked out of the synagogue. His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders who already had decided that anyone who acknowledged that Jesus was the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. That was why his parents said, he is of age. Ask him. Next, yet at the same time, many, even among the leaders, believed in him. But because of the Pharisees, they would not openly acknowledge their faith for fear they would be put out of the synagogue, for they loved human praise more than praise from God. So even the leaders were afraid of the leaders. They were afraid of themselves. They would be put out of the synagogue. No problem. You just go across town and join a different synagogue, right? Place your membership there. No, you can't do that. You can't do that. You're blacklisted, probably throughout the Roman world there.
It's tantamount like being disfellowshipped or ostracized.
Yeah.
That you can't use the synagogue as your place of worship and your community center. Yes,
like you said, that people didn't have a copy of the scrolls at home. They couldn't read. Some of them couldn't read, but they were very expensive to have. It was a place of worship. They had the temple. Maybe you could hear some people, but the temple didn't have seats or pews. You didn't go worship there. You did that in the synagogue. They had the seats. It was a place of prayer. It was a place to study Scripture. You'd had the Scripture proclaimed to you. There were two passages generally in the synagogue service. You would have a lesson from the Torah, and then you would have the lesson from the prophets. And when Jesus teaches in the synagogue, he did the second one. He did the one from Isaiah. It was a school for your children. It was also a rabbinical school. It was a community center, as Gordon said, and it could also act as a hospice. So you did not want to get kicked out of the synagogue. Later, Joseph of Arimathea. He was a leader. He was a prominent member of the Sanhedrin. Joseph of Arimathea asked Pilate for the body of Jesus. Now, Joseph was a disciple of Jesus, but secretly, because he feared the Jewish leaders, of which he was one. With Pilate's permission, he came and took the body away. He was accompanied by Nicodemus. Nicodemus, John chapter 3, was a member of the Jewish ruling council, that is the Sanhedrin. He was accompanied by Nicodemus, the men who earlier had visited Jesus at night. Nicodemus brought a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 75 pounds. Not cheap. A lot of money there. So these two ruling members, I guess the secret is out now. The secret is out. They got his body down from the cross, before the Sabbath began at sunset. But now, Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea handled a dead body. What did that do to them participating in the Sabbath? They were unclean. They could not participate in the Sabbath. So they can't participate in the Sabbath, and their secret is out now. They were followers of Jesus. And then this is after the resurrection. On the evening of the first day of the week, even when the disciples were together with the doors locked for fear of the Jewish leaders, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be to you." They were still in fear, but the general consensus from Gamaliel is once the leader dies, it goes away. So possibly the apostles really didn't have anything to fear at this point because, their leader died, they're just going to disperse. So here's our lesson, John 7:14-24. Jesus teaches at the Festival of Booths. So not until halfway through the festival, this is a 7-day festival. So it begins on, like on a Sunday. So this would be on a Monday. Not until halfway through the festival. It goes from Friday to Friday, so it's like a Monday. Not until halfway through the festival did Jesus go up to the temple courts and begin to teach. Well, I think people know he's there now, right? You don't teach at the temple courts, without anyone knowing. And you got temple courts. So that this would likely be both the court of the Gentiles, the outer court, and then where Jesus usually taught was the court of the women. This is where only Jews could be present. So he's teaching both Gentiles and the court of the women. The Jews there were amazed and asked, how did this man get such learning without having been taught? Or how does this man know his letters? He's not a trained rabbi. There was also this amazement. Remember, how does the Sermon on the Mount end? He didn't teach. He taught with authority, not like the scribes and the Pharisees. So, he's teaching like a scribe, but he's not a scribe.
And you get an earlier glimpse of that when Jesus disappears for 3 days at his 12th or 13th birthday.
They were amazed.
And he is amazing the rabbis of the time up at the temple.
Yes. And how do you think the scribes feel about him teaching like he's one of them? This guy. They were also amazed, remember, at the apostles. How do these people, these Galileans have this? And then they realized he had been with Jesus. But he's teaching like a scribe when he's not a scribe. Okay? It was pretty much demanded at that time that someone speaking like a rabbi have training under a rabbi. If you're talking like a rabbi, you should have been trained like a rabbi. The passage from the Babylonian Talmud here, written a few centuries later, but that says a person who studies Torah without formal rabbinic training is no better than a common person who knows nothing. Yep. Yep. So would we hire a minister that didn't go to Bible college? A self-taught? Even though he knows everything. You ask him every question possible and wow, but you didn't go to Bible college. So but what about Paul? He was trained well, right?
He was well qualified.
Yeah. What did the Athenian Stoics and Epicureans call him? A babbler. This guy's a babbler. You couldn't get any higher training than he had. So it's your perspective. Jesus answered, my teaching is not my own. It comes from the one who sent me. Anyone who chooses to do the will of God will find out whether my teaching comes from God or whether I speak on my own. If I speak on my own, it glorifies me. If I speak for the one who sent me, it glorifies the one who sent me. It glorifies God. And that's the title of our lesson today. Jesus glorifies God. So, it comes from the one who sent me. Well, Jesus, who sent you? The words you hear are not my own. They belong to who? The Father who sent me. So, he is glorifying the one who sent him. The Father sent him, so he is glorifying the Father. So these good words, these words are so impressive. They're not Jesus' words. He says, these are the words that God has given me to tell you. Whoever speaks on their own does so to gain personal glory for themselves, but he who seeks the glory of the one who sent him, in that case, God, is a man of truth. There is nothing false about him. Has not Moses given you the law? Yet not one of you keeps the law. Why are you trying to kill me? Now he said, if you truly seek God, you'll know my words are true. So what did the Bereans do to see if Paul's words were true. They searched the scriptures. You can do that at the synagogue. Now this last, verse 19 seems out of place here. Has not Moses given you the law, yet no one keeps the law? Why are you trying to kill me? Isn't there a command in the law about killing someone? Shall not kill. You're not keeping the law when you're trying to kill me. You know, I didn't do anything that deserves killing, but you're trying to kill me here. Paul confirms this. He says, not one of you keeps the law. Paul says, not even those who are circumcised by keep the law. Who is he talking about here? The Jews, right? Those who are circumcised can't keep the law. So he's telling the Jews, why do you demand then that these Gentiles be circumcised in order to keep the law? When you are circumcised and you can't keep the law. Now the crowd, of course, is confused by this. You're demon-possessed, Beelzebub. Who is trying to kill you? I think they're speaking correctly here. They don't know that anyone's trying to kill him. This is the crowd. So, who is trying to kill him and why? We go back earlier to John chapter 5. So, because Jesus was doing these things, what things? Healing when? On the Sabbath. That's a day to cease work. Stop working. Sabbath. The Jewish leaders began to persecute him. In his defense, Jesus says to them, my Father is always at work to this very day, and I too am working. For this reason, they tried all the more to kill him. So they'd been trying before, but now they really are stepping it up. Not only was Jesus breaking the Sabbath by healing on the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. That's blasphemy. You don't do that. So we'll move on. This will get us, chronologically to the point of our lesson. Sometime after, John uses this as a transition statement quite a bit, like 11 times in his gospel. He'll say after this, after this, after this. Jesus crossed to the far shore. Sometime after Jesus had been teaching what was in the previous chapter, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, and then we got the parenthetical. For non-Jews, he says that's the Sea of Tiberias, how other people knew it. And a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs he had performed by healing the sick. Then Jesus went up on the mountainside and sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover festival was near. So this will be the Passover before the last Passover. So he's got 1 year to go. Passover festival was near. Okay, so here's the chart here. This gives the calendar of events here. And this is our passage here, John chapter 6:4. And then this is our lesson right here, John chapter 7:1. So we have about 6 months going by. And these are the 3 festivals that all Jews were required to keep: Passover, or the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of Weeks, or Pentecost, and then the Feast of Tabernacles down here. And then it's interesting, throughout the Gospels, Pentecost becomes very important in Acts. There's no mention of the Pentecost anywhere in the Gospels. Kind of interesting. A Day of Atonement, very important. No mention of that in the Gospels. But here we've got Tabernacles. John and only John mentions Tabernacles. John and only John mentions the Feast of Dedication, otherwise known as Hanukkah, when the oil miraculously lasted longer than it should have. So we got about 6 months here until our lesson. So after this time period, Jesus feeds the 5,000. He walks on water. He gives the talk on the bread of life, which was done in the synagogue at Capernaum. And then many disciples desert Jesus. So this would have been up in Galilee, at Capernaum, that this happened. And then Jesus at the Feast of Tabernacles, John chapter 7. So we're moving on here. Jesus says to them, this is to the crowd, he says, I did one miracle, and you are all amazed. I think we would too, wouldn't we? Isn't one miracle enough to amaze you? It was a good miracle. Yet because Moses gave you circumcision, though actually it did not come from Moses, but from the patriarchs, you circumcise a boy on the Sabbath. Notice the parenthetical, I put it in a... I looked at many Bible versions with red letter, and they had that parenthetical as Jesus saying that.
Also on the eighth day, if you look at the birth of Christ, his parents take him up for him to be circumcised. And that would have been, according to what I have read, that would have been the time where the name is given.
And they didn't call him Emmanuel, did they?
No.
They gave him a very common name, Yeshua, like Joshua. Okay. So I didn't put that in red letter. I think he said, yet because Moses gave you circumcision, you circumcise a boy on the Sabbath. He wouldn't say, yet because Moses gave you circumcision, though actually it came from, the Jews knew that. I think that's something John, of course John is inspired, put that in there. I'm not saying it's not inspired, I just don't think Jesus said that. One miracle. What was the miracle? After this, there was a feast of the Jews. After this, there's that thing that John uses to move on. After that, the lessons he was taught, there was a feast of the Jews, unnamed feast. Jesus goes up to Jerusalem for this feast. Now there is in Jerusalem, by the sheep gate, a pool in Aramaic called Bethesda. I think it's called the sheep gate. There are like 12 gates in Jerusalem, and the sheep gate is the gate through which the sacrificial sheep came into the temple area. So in Aramaic, it's called Bethesda, which has 5 roofed colonnades. And these lay a multitude of invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. So this is the miracle he did there some time back. And they remembered it. One man was there, had been an invalid for 38 years, quite a long time. At this time in history, 38 years, that was close to a lifetime. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been there for a long time, he said, "Do you want to be healed?" That's odd, isn't it? Of course I want to be healed. That's why I'm here. The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me in the pool when the water is stirred up." Isn't there a comment somewhere that an angel came down and stirred up the water, or is that someplace else? An angel came up and stirred up this water, and then the first one that goes in gets healed. So he says he's waiting there, the water gets stirred up, and he's an invalid, he can't get in. Other people beat him to it. So he's kind of frustrated. He's been there 38 years, or he's been an invalid 38 years, and he can't get healed here with this healing water. Jesus said to him, "Get up, take up your bed, and walk." And once the man was healed, he took up his bed and walked. Now the day was the Sabbath. Did the leaders rejoice? This man is healed.
Yes.
What was their concern?
In verse 4 of that 5th chapter, it does say that an angel was associated with
stirring up of the water. Yeah. And isn't that like a parenthetical or something? Not all versions. Next week, the entire class is on inside brackets the woman caught in adultery. Now that day was the Sabbath. So it shows the hardness of the heart of the leaders that this man who had been healed, in this case for 38 years, gets healed on the Sabbath. Their point of view was, it's good he's healed. He could have got healed. What's one more day? What's one more day? Wait till the next day. And in fact, there was a ruler of the synagogue who didn't yell at Jesus, got mad at the people who were coming to be healed on the Sabbath. He was mad at them. Now, if a boy can be circumcised on the Sabbath so that the law of Moses may not be broken, why are you angry with me for healing a man's whole body on the Sabbath? Stop judging by mere appearances, but instead judge correctly. Which came first, circumcision or the law of Moses? Which came first? Do it on the 8th day in Genesis, or do it on the 8th day in the law? Which came first? He told Abraham, do it on the 8th day. That was earlier, that had precedence. You know, and there was no change in the law, in the Torah.
I think the answer he gave, didn't Moses give you circumcision? In other words, it was made a part of keeping the law correctly.
Yeah, keeping is part of the covenant. And it was necessity for being part of the community. It was a necessity for participating in any of the feasts. And it was not only done to members of the household, but to all, the servants and that, so they could also participate in these festivals. And that law is Leviticus 12:3, which says, you do it on the 8th day. So stop judging by mere appearances, but instead judge correctly. And guess what? You're going to get out of here before the bell. I've heard it said, is that the first bell? Yes. Okay, you're going to get out of here before the second bell. I've heard it said, preachers will sometimes get criticized for going over. How often do they get criticized for ending early? But wait a minute. I'm going to cut down on my contribution by about, 5% because you didn't give me the full time. Would that happen? You only gave us 90% of our time. Let me write a new check here. Don't judge on appearance. Don't judge a book by its cover. Okay, next week. Oh, there's one more slide. I lied. Forgive me. Thought to remember. Choose. Are you working for your glory to edify yourself, or are you working for God's glory? Next week, Jesus prevents 2 stonings. That'll be the story of the woman convicted or brought to Jesus for an assessment. What do you think? Moses, the law says this. What do you say? And the second stoning was his own stoning. He definitely wants to prevent that one. So that is it. Any comments, any questions?
It would appear that Jesus would do things a certain way in order to cause people to think, like he says, eat my flesh and drink my blood. You don't have any reference of, except for the disciples, well, what did you mean by that?
Yeah.
The audience was just shocked, and they all started flaking off, leaving, following Jesus, and going back into the regular ranks Judaism.
Yeah. Jesus is in Jerusalem. It says, destroy this temple and I will rebuild it in 3 days. And they're saying, wait, it's been 46 years here and you're going to rebuild it in 3 days.
They just didn't get it.
Yeah. Well, actually, he said, if you destroy this temple, I will rebuild it in 3 days. At his trial, they said, well, he said he was going to destroy the temple. That was one of the charges they brought against him. And of course, Pilate says, well, that's ridiculous. You know he can't do that. So they had to come up with some false charges. All right, that's it.
Thanks, Warner.